3:41 a.m. The Eastern Mediterranean Sea, 112 nautical miles southwest of Cyprus. The sea here is deep, 3,000 meters to the limestone bottom, and on this night it is calm, the surface reflecting a thin overcast sky and long, oily swells from the northwest. Air temperature 17 degrees Celsius. Wind at 9 knots. Visibility unlimited beneath the overcast layer. A beautiful night for sailing. A terrible night to be the target. The USS Harry S. Truman, CVN-75, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, holds a steady course at 16 knots on an easterly heading, her 2 reactors running at 42% power, her wake white and wide across the dark Mediterranean. She is the flagship of Carrier Strike Group 8, deployed to the 6th Fleet area of operations in support of NATO commitments and regional deterrence. Around her, in layered formation, the Ticonderoga-class cruiser USS Normandy, the Arleigh Burke destroyers USS Cole, USS Gravely, USS Mitcher, and USS Farragut, and, running silent at depth, the USS Connecticut, SSN-22, a Seawolf-class fast-attack submarine, positioned ahead of the formation on the threat bearing, listening. The Russian aerospace forces had been building toward this moment for 72 hours. The intelligence picture had been detailed and alarming. 2 MiG-31K Foxhound interceptors, the specialized carrier aircraft for the Kh-47M2 Kinzhal hypersonic aeroballistic missile, had been repositioned from Engels Air Base to Khmeimim Air Base in Latakia, Syria, 2 days earlier. The movement had been tracked by satellite imagery and signals intelligence from the first moment. EUCOM had flagged it. 6th Fleet had been notified. The strike group commander had briefed his commanding officers at 8 p.m. the previous evening. The threat is real. The threat is specific, and the threat is unlike anything this strike group has ever trained against in a live environment. The Kh-47M2 Kinzhal, NATO reporting name, Killjoy, is not a cruise missile. It is an aeroballistic weapon. Launched from an aircraft at altitude and speed, it follows a ballistic trajectory to its target while maneuvering throughout its flat profile to defeat interception. Its speed in the terminal phase, assessed at Mach 10 to Mach 12. Its range, approximately 2,000 kilometers from the launch aircraft. Its warhead, 480 kilograms of high explosive or, in alternative configurations, a nuclear device. Its CEP, assessed at 1 to 2 meters with the active radar homing seeker engaged in the terminal phase. The Kinzhal had been declared operational in 2018. Russian President Vladimir Putin had publicly called it an ideal weapon that makes existing missile defense systems useless. The Russian military had used it in combat over Ukraine, where it had struck fixed infrastructure targets with high accuracy. Against a moving ship operating under active defense in open ocean, the calculation was different. The Russians believed it was not different enough. At 3:41 a.m., both MiG-31K aircraft, which had been orbiting at 15,000 meters over the Syrian coast under radar silence for 40 minutes, illuminate their launch radars simultaneously. The pre-launch radar emission lasts for 11 seconds, long enough to compute the fire control solution, short enough that the Russian planning staff had assessed it would not provide sufficient warning for an intercept response. 11 seconds later, at 3:41 a.m. and 11 seconds, both aircraft released their Kinzhal missiles. 2 Kh-47M2S, climbing immediately on their rocket motors, accelerating through Mach 4 in the first 20 seconds of flight, climbing to an altitude of approximately 50 kilometers before beginning the terminal descent that will bring them down on the Truman at Mach 10 from nearly directly above. Time from release to impact, computed at approximately 4 minutes and 50 seconds. They had made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake, the 11-second radar emission. Russian planners had assessed that 11 seconds of MiG-31K fire control radar emission was insufficient warning time for a surface ship to generate and execute an intercept solution. That assessment was accurate for a ship operating alone, with only its own sensors, against a threat appearing with no prior tracking context. The USS Truman's strike group was not operating alone and did not lack context. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye that had been orbiting at 28,000 feet on a racetrack pattern southwest of Cyprus since 11 p.m., specifically because the MiG-31K repositioning to Khmeimim had triggered an elevated surveillance posture. Detected the MiG-31K fire control radar emission in the first second of its 11-second duration. The E-2D crew had been waiting for exactly this emission. They had the MiG-31K tracks on their display. They knew what the radar meant. The threat notification pushed to every ship in the formation via Link 16 before the emission ended. The second mistake, the altitude. The Kinzhal's 50-kilometer peak altitude during its ballistic arc is well above the atmosphere, above the point where aerodynamic maneuverability is meaningful, in the thin upper atmosphere where the weapon follows a predictable ballistic path governed by physics rather than guidance inputs. In this phase of flight, the Kinzhal is at its most vulnerable to ballistic missile defense intercept. The SM-6 Block 1 aboard the USS Normandy, the cruiser, had been upgraded to the Dual 1 configuration, giving it a limited ballistic missile defense capability against short to medium-range ballistic threats in the terminal phase. The SM-6 Dual I is not a dedicated BMD interceptor like the SM-3. But against a Kinzhal still in its near-ballistic descent arc at 40 to 50 kilometers altitude, before its terminal maneuvering phase fully engages, the SM-6's new seeker and expanded engagement envelope gave it a geometry that Russian planners had not included in their intercept probability model, because the SM-6 Dual I's BMD capability had been classified until 6 months before this engagement. The third mistake, the formation geometry. The MiG-31Ks launched from a bearing of approximately 045 degrees relative to the Truman, northeast from the Syrian coast. The USS Farragut, positioned on the strike group's northeast quadrant as the air defense picket ship on the most likely threat bearing, was the closest surface ship to the launch point and had the optimal engagement geometry against inbound threats from that bearing. The Farragut's position had not been chosen randomly. It had been chosen 72 hours earlier when the MiG-31K repositioning was first reported by the strike group's air defense coordinator specifically to maximize defensive coverage on the bearing most likely to be used for a Kinzhal attack from Khmeimim. The Farragut had been waiting on the right bearing with the right weapons for 3 days. The fourth mistake? They fired 2 missiles. 2 Kh-47M2 is a large expenditure of a weapon system of which Russia has a limited operational inventory. The Russian planners assessed 2 missiles as providing a high single-target kill probability against the carrier. They did not assess 2 missiles as providing a high probability of overwhelming a fully alerted, networked, multi-ship defensive architecture where every ship had pre-computed intercept solutions and pre-allocated interceptors. 2 missiles is a saturation attack against a single ship defense. Against 6 ships networked into a single combat system, 2 missiles is an undersized salvo. The fifth mistake was the most fundamental. They believed their own performance data on the Kinzhal's terminal maneuverability. The weapon's Mach 10 terminal velocity is real. Its terminal maneuverability, the ability to make course corrections in the final seconds of flight to defeat intercept, is real. But the maneuvering occurs at Mach 10 in the dense lower atmosphere, which creates enormous aerodynamic heating and limits the magnitude of course correction achievable without structural failure of the weapon. The maneuvering envelope of the Kinzhal at terminal velocity had been modeled by DIA analysts based on classified telemetry data collected from Ukrainian theater engagements. The SM-6 dual eyes engagement algorithm incorporated that maneuvering model. The intercept geometry was computed against the actual constrained maneuver envelope, not the theoretical maximum that Russian briefing materials claimed. At 3:41 a.m. and 15 seconds, 4 seconds after the Kinzhal releases, the USS Farragut's Aegis combat system receives the E-2D track data and classifies both inbound contacts as aeroballistic threats. Fire control solutions are computed in 9 seconds. The Farragut's TAO requests weapons free authorized. Engage all tracks. All units engage in coordination. At 3:42 a.m. and 22 seconds, 1 minute and 11 seconds after launch, the USS Farragut fires 4 SM-6 dual I missiles from her forward VLS cells in a 6-second ripple. The SM-6 dual I is physically identical to the standard SM-6, but carries a modified seeker algorithm and an expanded terminal guidance envelope that allows it to engage targets at higher altitudes and against ballistic approach profiles. The 4 missiles climb on their solid fuel boosters, clearing the Farragut's deck in under 2 seconds each, accelerating to Mach 3.5 as they climb toward intercept altitude. At 3:42 a.m. and 40 seconds, the USS Normandy fires 4 SM-6 dual I missiles from her own VLS cells. The Normandy, positioned closer to the Truman's beam on the formation's northern flank, has a slightly different engagement geometry. Her interceptors approach the Kinzhal tracks from a lateral angle rather than head-on, which increases the probability of intercept against the warhead section specifically rather than the missile body. 8 SM-6 dual I interceptors climbing. 2 Kinzhal missiles descending from 50 kilometers at Mach 10. The geometry closes at a combined velocity that makes the engagement window a matter of physics and computation rather than human reaction time. The first intercept occurs at 3:44 a.m. and 7 seconds, 2 minutes and 56 seconds after Kinzhal launch, at an altitude of 31 kilometers above the Mediterranean. The SM-6's active radar seeker acquires the first Kinzhal in its descent and begins terminal guidance corrections. The Kinzhal, now in its terminal maneuvering phase, executes a programmed lateral course change of 9 degrees, well within its structural envelope at this altitude and speed. The SM-6's guidance algorithm, preloaded with the Kinzhal's maneuvering model, has computed the expected maneuver and biased its intercept approach to compensate. The maneuver does not defeat the seeker. The SM-6 corrects. It closes. It detonates its continuous rod warhead at 3.7 meters from the Kinzhal's guidance section. At Mach 10, a proximity detonation at 3.7 meters is functionally a direct hit. The continuous rod warhead deploys a ring of steel rods at 3,000 meters per second, a circular fragmentation pattern designed to sever the aerodynamic control surfaces and the guidance electronics of the target simultaneously. The first Kinzhal's control surfaces are severed. Its guidance system is destroyed. The missile continues on its last commanded trajectory, no longer maneuvering, no longer guided, and impacts the Mediterranean Sea 14 kilometers short of the Truman at 3:44 a.m. and 21 seconds. Its warhead does not achieve the fusing conditions for detonation. The weapon hits the sea at Mach 6 and disintegrates into fragments scattered across a 2-kilometer impact footprint of open water. The second Kinzhal has been tracking the second pair of SM-6 from the Farragut and executing its own programmed evasion. It pulls a 12-degree lateral maneuver at 24 kilometers altitude at the edge of its structural envelope and defeats the first SM-6 from the Farragut. The SM-6 passes within proximity fuse range. Detonation. Partial effect. The fragmentation pattern clips the Kinzhal's left control surface, but does not destroy the guidance system. The Kinzhal continues inbound, damaged, one control surface partially compromised, losing some terminal maneuverability, but maintaining Mach 9 plus approach velocity. The second SM-6 from the Farragut salvo, programmed with a 2-second delay specifically to engage behind the first interceptor in case of a miss, closes on the damaged Kinzhal. The seeker acquires cleanly. The Kinzhal, its remaining control surfaces working harder to compensate for the damaged one, has a slightly more predictable flight path than the fully functional weapon. The SM-6 closes to 2.1 meters. Detonation. Full continuous rod fragmentation. The Kinzhal's guidance section is destroyed. Both remaining control surfaces are severed. The weapon continues ballistically at Mach 8. It is falling. It is not guided. It is not maneuvering. But it is still a 500-kilogram object traveling at Mach 8 on a trajectory that passes through the airspace above the USS Truman's operating area. The debris track, computed in real time by the Aegis system, places the Kinzhal's impact point approximately 8 kilometers ahead of the Truman's bow, close enough that the strike group commander orders a hard course change to port at maximum rudder. The Truman heels hard to port. The course change is immediate. The revised impact point of the ballistic debris shifts to 12 kilometers off the Truman's starboard bow. The debris impacts the Mediterranean at Mach 5 and disintegrates. No fragments reach the ship. 3:46 a.m. and 31 seconds. 5 minutes and 20 seconds after launch. Both Kinzhal missiles neutralized. One destroyed by proximity intercept at 31 kilometers altitude. One rendered ballistic by proximity intercept at 22 kilometers altitude. Its unguided debris falling harmlessly into the Mediterranean. 0 American casualties. USS Harry S. Truman, undamaged. Executing emergency course change, but returning to base course at 3:47 a.m. The strike group commander keys his radio without inflection. All units, strike group. Both tracks neutralized. 0 casualties. 0 damage. Counterstrike package is authorized. Execute Sword Strike Mediterranean. All assets. The Sword Strike Mediterranean package had been built by EUCOM targeting teams over the 48 hours following the MiG-31K repositioning to Khmeimim. It was specific, current, and executable on authorization. The targets were not generic Russian military assets in Syria. They were the specific assets that had planned, enabled, and executed this attack. At 3:47 a.m., the USS Cole opens 14 VLS cells. 14 Tomahawk Block 5 missiles climb from the destroyer's deck in an 18-second ripple, heading northeast toward Syria at 550 knots. The USS Mitcher fires 12 Tomahawks 12 seconds later. 26 Tomahawks, crossing the eastern Mediterranean at low altitude. Primary target: the two MiG-31K aircraft at Khmeimim Air Base. Both aircraft had recovered to the base immediately following the Kinzhal release, a process that satellite tracking confirmed was complete by 3:45 a.m., 4 minutes after launch, still 2 minutes before the engagement concluded. The MiG-31K is an irreplaceable platform. Russia has a total operational inventory of fewer than 10 aircraft configured for Kinzhal carriage. Both aircraft were now on the ground at Khmeimim, in their hardened aircraft shelters on the eastern side of the airfield. 8 Tomahawks. Each shelter takes one Block 5 penetrating warhead through the reinforced roof, detonating inside the shelter space. The MiG-31K is not designed to survive a Block 5 detonation at zero standoff distance inside an enclosed concrete structure. Neither aircraft survives. Secondary target: the Kinzhal missile storage and maintenance facility at Khmeimim, a hardened building assessed into satellite imagery as the location where the two expended Kinzhals had been removed from storage and mated to the MiG-31Ks for tonight's mission. Additional missiles assessed as stored at this facility: 2 to 4 rounds. 6 Tomahawks. The storage building takes a penetrating warhead. The maintenance facility takes 2. The loading equipment and the specialized handling cranes, items that cannot be quickly replaced and without which Kinzhal-armed MiG-31Ks cannot be rapidly returned to combat readiness, are destroyed along with the building. Tertiary target: the Russian Aerospace Forces Command facility at Khmeimim that had coordinated the strike package, a building separate from the main base operations center, identified by signals intelligence as the source of the encrypted communications traffic that had spiked in the 4 hours before the MiG-31K launch radar activation. 4 Tomahawks. The communications antenna array goes first. The building goes second, third, and fourth. At 3:52 a.m., 4F/A 18F Super Hornets from the Truman's Air Wing, armed with AGM-88E Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missiles, AARGM, launch from the carrier's catapults and push northeast at Mach 1.4. The AARGM is an evolution of the HARM anti-radiation missile that adds GPS-aided inertial navigation to the passive radar homing capability, meaning it can home on a radar emission, and if that radar goes silent before impact, the missile navigates to the last known position using GPS and terrain reference data. The two S-400 air defense batteries at Khmeimim, Russia's most advanced surface-to-air missile system, whose radars had been actively tracking the Truman strike group throughout the evening, had been radiating continuously. The AARGM crew aboard each F/A 18F had been recording the S-400's radar frequency, pulse repetition interval, and antenna position for the entire flight to the launch point. 8 AGM-88E missiles release at maximum range. Both S-400 batteries detect the inbound missiles and attempt to go silent. Too late. The AARGM's GPS inertial mode carries each missile to the recorded antenna position. All 8 missiles impact within 11 seconds of each other. Both S-400 batteries at Khmeimim destroyed at 4:04 a.m. 2B2. A Spirit stealth bombers, which had departed RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom 7 hours earlier under a pre-planned alert tasking and had been orbiting over the central Mediterranean waiting for strike authorization, released their payloads against the final target in the Sword Strike package, the underground command bunker at Khmeimim Air Base, where the strike group's commanders assessed the senior Russian Aerospace Forces officers who authorized tonight's Kinzhal attack, were sheltering. The B-2 carries GBU-57A/B Massive Ordnance Penetrators, 13,000 to 600 kilograms each, designed to penetrate 60 meters of earth or 40 meters of reinforced concrete. The bunker is assessed at 12 meters depth under 4 meters of reinforced concrete. The GBU-57 solves that assessment definitively. Both B-2s release one GBU-57 each on overlapping aim points 30 meters apart. The first impacts at 4:06 a.m. The seismograph at the USGS monitoring station in Cyprus records a 1.9 magnitude event by 4:09 a.m., 28 minutes after the first Kinzhal left the MiG-31K's pylon. The Sword Strike Mediterranean counterstrike is complete. Battle damage assessment, compiled by EUCOM at 6:30 a.m. from satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and B-2 crew reports. Both MiG-31K Kinzhal carrier aircraft, destroyed in hardened shelters at Khmeimim. Kinzhal storage and maintenance facility, destroyed. 2 to 4 additional missiles assessed as destroyed in storage. Russian Aerospace Forces Strike Coordination Facility, destroyed. Both S-400 batteries at Khmeimim, destroyed. Underground command bunker, catastrophic damage from dual GBU-57 impact, assessed structural collapse over 70% of bunker footprint. Khmeimim Air Base operational capacity severely degraded. Russian strategic hypersonic strike capability from Syrian territory eliminated. Estimated Russian military personnel killed in action, 51 to 78. American losses, 0. USS Harry S. Truman, 0 damage. All ships in formation, 0 damage. 0 aircraft lost. At 4:15 a.m., the Truman resumes her base course. Flight operations begin at 4:30 a.m. The first F/A-18E launches on combat air patrol. The formation returns to standard Steeman configuration. The SM-6 magazines are being assessed for reload. The strike group commander is completing his initial report to 6th Fleet. He reviews the engagement summary with the quiet attention of a man who has just watched his command do exactly what it was built to do. The Kinzhal had been Putin's crown jewel, the weapon he had stood before cameras to announce, the weapon he had called Invincible, the weapon Russia had paraded before the world as the proof that American aircraft carriers were obsolete. 2 of them launched from the most advanced platform in the Russian inventory, against a fully alerted, networked American carrier strike group. In the eastern Mediterranean, which Russia had treated as its own operating environment for a decade, both missiles stopped. Neither reached the ship. The response destroyed the aircraft, the missiles, the base infrastructure, the air defense, and the commanders who ordered the attack. 28 minutes, start to finish. In the Combat Information Center of the USS Truman, the watch relief runs on schedule at 4 a.m. Fresh crews, fresh coffee. The SPY-1B sweeps the Mediterranean. The E-2D's picture feeds into the Link 16 display, clean and clear. A Turkish frigate on a northerly course toward Istanbul. A Greek Coast Guard vessel near Rhodes, a merchant ship running west toward Gibraltar. Everything tracked, everything known. The eastern Mediterranean is open. The carrier is undamaged. The message written in the smoke above Khmeimim and the debris scattered across the seafloor of the Mediterranean is the same message that has been written every time someone tests it. There is no ideal weapon. There is no invincible strike. There is only the prepared defense and the certain response and the mathematical reality that the United States Navy has been winning this calculation for 80 years and has no intention of stopping. The Truman sails east. The sea is calm. The stars are coming out above the overcast. It is, once again, a beautiful night in the Mediterranean.